stop using a game as a reward, right? Like games shouldn't be just at the end, right? Like why? Again, there's some different kind of game based models out there, but like play first, play 5v5, take a slice of what you see, right? So you could do it in the moment, or you could have planned for this. This is something that we struggle with. So now we're going to practice in a conditioned game, and then we're going to go back to the game, right? Like you're going to get way more engagement by, like, letting them play, right? Like for the first 10, 15 minutes, and then focusing on a particular aspect of the game, and then going back to the game.
Welcome to the Cutting Edge Coaching Podcast, where we believe coaches are some of the most important teachers and leaders in the world, and they deserve to be supported. I'm your host, Luke Gromer, and every week we're bringing you conversations with coaches, experts, and leaders from across sports that will give you practical ideas and strategies that you can apply in your coaching to develop high-performing teams and high-character people.
Coaches, I'm excited to welcome Dr. Tom Parry to the podcast. Dr. Parry has expertise in sport and exercise science, specifically skill acquisition and performance psychology. His work focuses on the application of theoretical concepts to practitioner-based fields, such as sport coaching, physical therapy, occupational therapy, and fitness training. He has extensive experience working as a soccer coach and has consulted with coaches, physical education teachers, and therapists to enhance their work as movement practitioners. Dr. Parry's main research interest includes the investigation of factors that influence motor skill performance and learning, such as instruction, practice activity design, and the provision of feedback. He has recently published a motor skill behavior laboratory manual and currently serves on the editorial board of the United Soccer Coaches Association's Soccer Journal, writing pieces on the application of skill and acquisition theory. In this two-part conversation, we dive into what ecological dynamics is and how to apply the framework in your coaching, including deep dives into understanding what skill is, using constraints, the role of repetition, and more. As always, if you enjoyed the podcast and you want to grab a copy of the free podcast notes, just go to cuttingedgecoach.com/podcast or click the link in the show details to download a free PDF of notes from this episode or any episode of the podcast. Finally, if you're interested in a 6-week book club with other coaches studying the fantastic book The Culture System by my friend JP Nurbin, or a 5-month mentorship program, check out the links in the show details. Spots are limited for both. Now to my conversation with Dr. Tom Parry. Enjoy the episode.
We've started to do some of it already as far as how it plays out and practically what this belief system, this theory and framework looks like when you're coaching. But I want to talk a little bit more specifically about some parts of it. Will you talk about repetition within this framework? I think we've again started to hit it, but talk more about what this set of beliefs means for how we view repetition, and then what does that look like practically if we are following this framework?
Yeah, so like classically, traditional approach, we would call that repetition with repetition. We are trying to repeat a solution, the correct solution, right, they would say. In ecological dynamics, we look at it differently, and this comes from a guy called Bernstein. He did some work with, if you listeners have kind of touched on any of this sort of stuff, they've probably seen the blacksmith with the hammer, right? That's the classic picture showing that in 2 strikes, the hammer is moving in completely different paths. So he coined this phrase called repetition without repetition. And from a practical standpoint, like I had this conversation in my class the other day about like how we define repetition. Like a repetition meaning a trial, like a try at something. Yeah, I want loads of those, right? I want loads of attempts to solve the problem. But I don't want you to be doing the same thing over and over again. So the key concept of repetition without repetition is to repeat problems, but not solution. right? So my goal is to dribble to the other side of the field, right? Other side of the court, whatever sport that you're in, and to beat a defender. I don't care how you do that, right? I want you to find multiple ways to do that, right? Like, because now we're developing adaptable skill. So when those conditions change, I have a solution, right? I can maybe a functional solution will emerge that I've never even done before because I am adaptable in that situation. When we drill technique, as soon as those like task constraints change, your technique is non-functional anymore, right? So again, the key component is how do you get kids to develop skill that's adaptable, where we're repeating the problem without repeating the same solution.
Can you give some examples of that? Because I think that one, helpful for me, helpful for coaches. And sorry, actually, this thought was triggered in my mind before we go into those examples. You were talking about repetition, and we want to repeat problems but not solutions. And for some reason, the analogy that came into my mind, it would be like if you were a math teacher and you were working on multiplication and you only gave them 6 times 5, right? And you just keep having them repeat the same problem and it's the same solution. It's similarly to that. Sometimes when we break it down into a drill, that's kind of like what we're doing is like do the same thing again and again and again and
Yeah.
again and again and
Yeah.
again.
Once once you worked it out, you don't need to work it out again.
Yeah, but we know that, well, if we want kids to learn how to do multiplication, they have to learn how to multiply all these different numbers, right? They do
They-
6 times 4 and 6 times 6.
Yeah,
And
they need to learn principles, right?
yeah,
But also, again,
yeah.
like there's some great work. I read a paper the other day that was about education, because one of the key problems I think with sport is we have been surrounded by cognitive psychology for years. All of your schooling is like it's structured around a cognitive psychology perspective, right? We store stuff in our head, right? Like the more stuff you have in your head, the more skilled you are at school. That's what we're basically telling kids. All of our sport experience have been kind of garnered around that same idea, right? Like, oh, you want to be good? Well, you need to like work, practice, get this technique right, and then you'll be able to magically apply it somehow. So I was reading a paper about education and it kind of pushing the idea that we need to move to more of an ecological approach to learning in school. And the author had a really great example and said, what a cognitive psychologist would do is present a problem to a student that says, I need 2/3 of 3/4 of a cup of cream cheese. Right? So it could be like Weight Watchers. Weight Watchers doing it, and I have to measure an amount of an amount. Right? Well, in cognitive psychology, they have knowledge about right what to do in their head. So they do this abstract math like computation to come up with the answer. An ecological psychologist would give them some cream cheese, right? And what they would do, they'd measure out 2/3 of a, well, I think it was like 2/3 of a cup, 3/4 of 2/3 of a cup, I think was the problem. They'd measure out 2/3 of a cup, put it on the table, flatten it out into a circle, and then cut a quarter off it. They solve the problem, right? Like, that is way more functional. I think that's a problem in school as well, is that, like, we teach these abstract concepts without application. Right? And in sport, we need to avoid that like the plague. Like we need to make sure that we are teaching functional behaviors. And the best way to do that is in those small game type environments, which I think is what you were talking about before. Like I think you asked like ways to do it, right? Like ways to teach. So I do one with the young ones. I don't often get to do a lot of things. So when I do get the, hey, do you want to do an activity today? Yes, I do. Right? Like, let's get away from these drills. So we do on like an intro activity called zombie tag. So the coaches act as zombies. We have a space. It could be 20 by 20, something like that. There's 3, possibly 4 coaches in that space. And we're just moving around like zombies in that area. And if you get tagged, you have to freeze like a zombie, and you can get released if someone plays the ball through your legs. Right? Okay? Kids are dribbling fast and slow. They're changing direction. They have to be aware that if they avoid one zombie, that they don't go into another zombie. Right? But it's fun, and they're enjoying themselves, and there's that great noise of enjoyment, right? That comes with that. When they do drills, it's silent, absolute silence, right? And then we built onto that with an activity that I call crabby dribbles. So this is usually a like 20 long by 10 wide space. The coach is in a channel in the middle, and we act like crabs, right? And if you get pinched by the crab, then you lose a point, right? Like for your team. So the great thing about that, the great thing about that young age, by the coach being the opponent, I can scale my pressure, I can scale my movements to each individual, right? So kids are good, I can move a lot more, or move maybe more randomly in that space, so then they have to make decisions and change direction to avoid me. Kids that maybe need a bit more confidence, I can move a bit more slower or a bit more predictable. So like they're still making decisions, they're still changing directions. Like I often put a time constraint on it. So I'll count down like 5 seconds, right? So as soon as they start going, as they start dribbling, I'll say 5, 4, right? So they've got to go fast, right? Like they can't just take forever to kind of get through. That's a constraint. Like putting a time limit on is a constraint. So like those are fun activities, and do people, maybe traditional people, look at those as look at them in a funny way? Yeah, 100%. But I don't care, because I think it's right. Like I think that at 8 years old, at any age, practice should be fun, right? You'll learn better when you're having more fun, right? And you don't need to be explicitly learning in that process either, right? Like you can learn by playing. Like play is such a valuable tool. Just design game, like you said. Like I love doing overloads, right? 4 versus 3, 3 versus 2, right? Hey, in 3, can you take advantage of having an extra person? And 2, how do you deal with that? What a great problem to set, right? You know what I mean? Like, and they'll embrace it. They'll enjoy that problem solving.
Yeah. Yes. So many good things there. Play is fun. The game should be fun. We all started playing sport because it was fun. We're probably coaching because we think coaching and/or sport, right, is fun, and so yeah, and ultimately, like, most of the people we coach, the vast majority of them, at some point, their playing career will end. They likely won't go on to college or professional levels. They'll probably end at high school, and hopefully, at least I hope that the athletes that I coach are ones that come back and one that they're lifetime lovers of sport. They stay active, involved in sport. They end up becoming coaches, right? Giving back to their communities and kids. So I think just having that perspective too from the time they're 8, it's like, man, we got to make sure this is fun,
Yeah,
right? Because we
I
want
think
them to love it.
I think we confuse elite level play with seriousness, right? And if you watch teams, like you can go on YouTube and you can watch, like for me, for soccer, you can watch Premier League teams. I'm sure there's probably some basketball ones that people can go on and watch, and you can see part of their practice. And there's quite a few that have been out recently where they're playing like an intro tag type game or something at the beginning. Right? Like these are professionals. This is their job. Like they get paid lots and lots of money to play. But you've got to keep practice interesting. Like if it's just a grind all the time, you lose a lot of people. And if we want to get more people at the top of the pyramid, you need a wide pyramid. So if you're losing kids from your sport, it's your fault. right? Like you are not engaging them in a way where they're saying, "I want to go back to practice," right? Like I'm. It's bad now because I coach these two teams. One of their practices overlap, so the kids only see me tonight, like the little kids. So last week when I showed up on Tuesday, we'd done crabby dribbles, we'd done zombie tag before the week before. A couple of kids come running up to me and were just like, "Can we do crabby dribbles today?" Right? Like, if that doesn't tell you like what coaching should be about, that's just, I mean, like, they want to do it. They don't even realize that they're learning, right? Like, so like why take it to this, let's learn these rigid army drills, and it's like that is long gone. That approach is way out of date.
Yeah. One of my favorite things is when one of my players comes up to me and yeah, asks if we can play a certain game or do, I mean, what they would call a drill. Um, and or sometimes I'll have a kid come up to me and go, "Coach, we gonna play 5-on-5 today?"
Yeah,
And I'll just ask them, "When was the last time we didn't play 5-on-5?"
right.
And they're like, "Oh, like yeah,
Well,
of course we're gonna play
and I
basketball
think I
today."
think that's something else, yeah, like practically that coaches can kind of take away. Um, like stop using a game as a reward, right? Like games shouldn't be just at the end, right? Like why again? There's some different kind of game based models out there, but like play first, play 5v5. Take a slice of what you see, right? So you could do it in the moment, or you could have planned for this. This is something that we struggle with. So now we're going to practice in a conditioned game, and then we're going to go back to the game, right? Like you're going to get way more engagement by, like, letting them play, right? Yeah, like for the first 10-15 minutes, and then focusing on a particular aspect of the game, and then going back to the game. Like it's like that's where a lot of learning will occur. But it's just like, oh, like if you do these drills right, then we'll play for the last 30 minutes. Like, and oftentimes it's just free play anyway. It's like you can still instruct in this model, right? Like in the ecological dynamics approach, you can still provide instructions. Those are task constraints, right? You can encourage them to explore different solutions. Hey, you've tried to hit that pass 3 times now and it's not worked. What's a different way that you could do it? Right? The goal is to get it to Jimmy. What's a different way that you can get it to Jimmy? So again, still doesn't say how to do it. I'm just encouraging them to search somewhere else. What the solution that you're currently using isn't working. So let's figure out a way where it becomes functional and works. Right? And I said this to my students today. I was just like, there's only 2 reasons why you should intervene in a technique. Number one, it's not functional. It's not doing what you want it. Like if I'm shooting basketballs and it's not going in the basket, yeah, you should probably say something, right? Like you should intervene, whether that's through instruction, whether that's through manipulating constraints or creating a task to do that. The second one is if there's a high potential for injury, right? Using this technique, you're going to get, it could be a severe injury or it could be like an overuse type injury. Those are the only 2 reasons you should intervene about technique, right? Is it not working? Do something about it. Is it potential to cause injury? Do something about it, right? Like just because it doesn't look a certain way, like why does that matter, right? Do you win games by your players shooting with great technique, or how many times it goes through the basket? Let's focus on what matters. You know?
Yeah, I like it when the ball goes in.
Yeah,
Uh, two things that I want to just tack on to what you were talking about, and then a final question for you. When you were talking about, hey, start with 5-on-5, see what's working, what's not working, and then go look at a piece of that. I think one of the helpful things for me, and I think for a lot of coaches, especially if you coach a group invasion game like basketball, soccer, lacrosse, hockey, is to think about the different phases of your game and the principles within that phase. And so, like, for example, transition defense is for sure the hardest aspect of basketball. To be good at neutralizing the offense's advantage quickly is difficult, right? It's why I like my teams to play quickly on offense because it's the easiest time to score transition offense. And so, hey, we played 5-on-5. We got absolutely destroyed in transition defense. Well, now let's go into some sort of small sided game where we're disadvantaged and we're trying to neutralize the advantage,
Yeah.
right? Maybe it's that we're playing 4-on-3, and the defense, if the defense keeps the offense from scoring for 8 seconds, like they win the possession, something like that,
Yeah,
right? Where
you do it.
now they
Like,
realize like I've just got to keep them from scoring for a limited amount of time because in the game, right, when it's 5-on-5, if they can keep them from scoring for 8 seconds, well, now we're back to 5-on-5,
yeah,
right?
you
So
do
it's like
a
it's
you could do a 10-second shot clock,
yeah,
right?
exactly. It's like, okay, this is what we're struggling with. Let's create a scenario or a game where now we're focused on being disadvantaged.
Yeah,
Let's put a rule on it so that we realize, hey, if this is how we can right improve in this phase or this area.
yeah. And like you gave like a kind of a good example there of constraining an opponent to help the other group learn, right? So by putting on like a 10-second shot clock, then I'm not constraining the defense. I'm constraining what we call constrain to afford, right? Okay, like so. In your example, by shortening the shot clock time, the offense has got to work a bit quicker, right? Like to create an opportunity to shoot, which then is going to make the defenders do something as well. It's a dyad, right? Like in opposed games, there are always opponents, right? So like missing that in practice seems a little bit silly, right? Because that's a key component of the game. They are probably the best information source in any game, right?
Yeah.
What the opponents do either presents opportunities or it takes them away, right? And what we want our athletes to do is to be adaptable. Like I say to my players all the time, like when I'm coaching, I'll say, whatever they do is wrong. Like if they press high, there's space somewhere else. If they sit in a block, we can drag them out. Whatever they choose to do, there is a different. If you use the same solution, yeah, it doesn't work, right? But if you use a different solution, then you will always find an answer. And I listened to a podcast the other day of talking about Alex Sarama. He did a podcast the other day and talked about he doesn't have like a game model or offense. What he does is taught his players at the college prep that he worked at to search for what he calls dominoes, right? We're going to do things on offense to destabilize the defense. And once we see that destabilization, we're going to keep doing things to create good opportunities to score, right? As the dominoes start to fall, then good opportunities to score are going to emerge. And then on defense, we're doing the opposite of that. We're trying to stay out of domino, right? We're trying to stay together. We're trying to stay compact and things like that. So I love that idea because it shifts some of the decision-making responsibility back to where it should be, which is on the players. Like one thing you cannot do in a game, and this is why coaches should sit down, right? Like you can't joystick a game, right? Because the information that you're giving is always too late, right? Running decisions up the chain of command up to the coach and back down to players will always be behind real time. So let's try and encourage players to attune to information so then they make decisions based on the affordances that are presented.
That's really good stuff. Do you have time for one more question?
Sure.
This might be I don't know if it's a can of worms, but I'll just throw it to you and see your thoughts.
I've got plenty of
So,
time, so it's fine.
okay, with what we've talked about with ecological dynamics versus right cognitive psychology, information processing, the more traditional approach. One of the things that I'm curious about is what are the implications for that when it comes to when it comes to language on your team, and yeah, I was thinking about things like language, uh, film study, right? Having common vocabulary that your team uses, that we all know what it means.
Yeah, there's
I guess
some.
my question is, so ecological dynamics, like we're talking about motor learning here, right? And I guess what I'm asking is there a blend of like, hey, motor learning, ecological dynamics, this is how it really happens. And then also we recognize that we do have, right, brains that we're thinking, that we do process information.
Yeah.
And so is there a marriage and mesh of the two when it comes to sport and coaching in
So,
some ways?
there's a distinction of knowledge, right? So you'll hear or read about in some papers about knowledge of and knowledge about. So knowledge of is considered information that allows me to act, to move. Right? That's the information I use to make decisions. I'm driving my car and the car in front of me is going too slow. So I'm going to look for information to tell me it's safe to kind of move around this car. Right? So that is development of knowledge of. That is developed through practice and like in the game, right? Like contextual learning, right? Like that's why we need to do more of that, right? Like if you have limited time, play, right? Like get them using the basketball, get them doing things where they get lots of repetitions of solving the same problem, right? The other side of that is knowledge about, and that's things like rules, the rules of the game. Like it's probably important to know rules of the game. I don't use my knowledge about the rules to perform my actions, but they give a framework to my action. I can only play inside the lines, right? I can only stand under the basket for so long, right? And like there are rules that are probably useful to know, but we don't necessarily use that to control action. So having shared language, I think, is a good idea. Again, Alex talks about that quite a lot for basketball, that they have words that they use, that they know what it means. Like they're not using it to control the actions that they do, but it's almost like identifying some intentions, right? Having Instead of having shared mental models, we have shared affordances, right? We start to see and recognize, and again, any instruction, any language is information, right? So if we want someone to do a backdoor cut, right, I could say BDC, right? Not when it's about to happen, but just like I see this as a potential affordance. By shouting BDC, my teammates know, oh, he's looking for the backdoor cut, right? Or whatever it is. Or you could use. They'll probably catch on to that after a couple of times. But it could be you can do some really abstract kind of stuff, like use animals, right? Anytime I say an animal, it means backdoor cut, right? So I'm like turtle, turtle, and they're just like, what? Like, what's going on? Too late. 2 points. Thank you. Right? Like, so yeah, I think having shared languages is useful, right? It's not what we use to control actions, but it does present additional information that we can use. Like if you don't know the rules of the game, you can't exploit them, right? You mean like so? There is something to be said about that, but like what you said about film too. Hey, if you're doing like 2-hour film sessions, I think you're doing it wrong, right? Like maybe 15, 20 minutes, right? Maybe on something that you're actually going to work on in practice. Hey, here's some film of the game that I've clipped. I noticed that transition defense wasn't great, right? So let's look at this here, right? So I show a couple of clips and I say, look, we're just about to lose the ball and you guys, your brains are still on offense, right? So what I want you to do is recognize those triggers. Look for that information that says, we're about to lose the ball here. We need to transition, right? So I've pointed that out in my film session. I now go into practice, and that's what we're working on. Like, I think that can be useful, right? But making them sit and watch an entire game, pointless, right? Like, it's a worthless endeavor, right? Like, and I have a good friend, Casey Crider. He's a volleyball coach. He's been on quite a few podcasts as well. And he talked about buying. He's at a different university now, but he was at the University of Miami as their associate head coach. And he just bought this like film system, right? So you can film the kid receiving a serve. Like, they go to this machine, they watch it, and like, oh, okay, look, like your arms need to be in this spot, right? You need to do it this way, like trying to like correct technique. And he said, when I just bought this equipment, and I just started learning more about ecological dynamics, and I was like, man, I just wasted a lot of money. Yeah, right? Like, this is not what we should be doing. He said, but what he did, he kind of just used it in a different way. Like, technology can still be useful. And what we want when someone's serve receiving in volleyball, we want it to be we want the ball to be easy to set for the setter. That's the goal. So all he did, he just moved the camera to face the setter, and then the serve receiver went to the video and saw how hard the setter had to work based on that pass, right? And he said, when you ask them in the moment, like, was that a good pass? They'd say, oh, yeah, it was, because their technique was good. But then when he showed them the video of the setter, like, scrambling to try and set it, it was like, oh, yeah, that was a terrible pass, right? So it's kind of just changing their focus. Like, external focus of attention is something that you'll probably hear kind of thrown around. Like, focusing on the task goal, right? The goal is to get the ball to the setter so they can do something with it, right? So use film in that way, right? In basketball, a pass is a better pass if they can shoot relatively quickly, right? If I throw you a ball that you have to then juggle to get under control, that is not a good pass, irrelevant of what your technique looks like. You know?
Well, that's awesome. That was actually very affirming. So I'm glad I went down that trail because, yeah, one of my favorite things to do with my teams is to do short 10, 15-minute film sessions looking at shot selection, the quality of the shots that we're taking. Are we getting open, in rhythm, in range with room shots? And then after that is to go out onto the court and work on shot selection right away. We
Yeah.
will play games where we score it differently based on the quality of shot that they take.
Yeah.
And it blows me away the progress that they make with that. And again, it's like I just focus on the outcome. Like, I just want us to get a great open shot, and then all the other little things that build up to that moment where we get that open shot, they figure out and they solve those problems. And so I think that was great. I'm glad you shared that around film of, yeah, hey, let's make sure it's in smaller doses, and ideally we watch it, we go out on court, we work on it. And then two, like the film is focused not on the technique, but more on the outcomes we're looking for, the principles that we're trying to, and also, like, one of the things that I think is really valuable in it is, like, you now it's not, obviously we're not connecting perception and action, but I think we can still be building their perception on film of, like, you're looking at at the game through video now, right? And
You're gaining some knowledge about,
mhm,
which will potentially facilitate your development of knowledge of, right?
yeah,
And so it's like this. It's a hard concept to kind of grasp initially, and there's quite a few papers that are starting to kind of delve a little bit deeper into
mhm.
those ideas. But like, ultimately, we need more time on the court working on those problems, right? So, and that's why I say, like, I think 15, 20 minutes, if you have an hour and a half, 2 hour practice, that stuff's either got to be done beforehand or take up a very small amount of time and also be functional, right? Like, we're doing it just, what you're doing, you're really highlighting intentions, right? That's kind of a key component of this approach too, is like, our intention is to get good shots, right? When we look at the film and look at all the shots that we took, only 50% were good uncontested shots or low contested shots. We need to increase that number, right? We need to be in the 70-80% range, and we'll score way more points, right? Like that way. So it's like, if you can get that across in a short period of time, but then go out onto the court and actually do it and expose them to it and give them opportunities to kind of search, explore, exploit what you're trying to get at, that's where the rich learning is going to occur, right? Than making them sit in a room and watch film for 2-3 hours when half of it's pointless anyway. I mean,
Yeah, and hopefully even in that 10 or 15 minutes, we're not just up there talking and lecturing. We're engaging with them, asking them questions. They're active participants in it.
Yeah, you could do.
Dr.
I just to kind of finish on that, like like you could clip like probably a game into 15 minutes of every shot, right? And you could put them into small groups and say, okay, I want you to watch this film, and I want you mark it good shot, bad shot, right? So that's active learning. You're doing active learning where instead of, like you said, like you lecturing about it, they're going through, they're watching and be like, yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, that's a bad one, right? Like, but then because they're in these small groups of 3-4 kids, they're now maybe arguing about it a little bit, right? Like, well, I thought that was a good one. I thought that was a bad one. Well, so maybe you have like a middle column as well, right? Not so sure about those ones. You know, like, it stimulates conversation, it stimulates engagement, and that's kind of what you want from your players.
I love it. Dr. Parry, this has been fantastic. Before we hop off, just share with the listeners where they can connect with you, learn more about the work that you do, and or more about the topics we've covered.
Yeah, so we moved back to Indiana a couple of years ago. So I work at Indiana University Kokomo, it's a regional campus. I have an email there that they can find online, but I also do some kind of coach education support type things through a company called Kestrel Psychology. So kestrelpsychology@gmail.com is a way that they can contact me as well. But again, I'm happy to, if people have questions or want some input on something, then I'm happy to help.
Thanks, Dr. Parry. We appreciate your time a ton.
Coaches, thanks for listening to this episode, and a huge thanks to Dr. Parry for joining me. You can find links to connect with Dr. Parry in the show details. And don't forget to check out the show details if you'd like the free podcast notes or you're interested in joining the book club or mentorship program. Thanks for listening to the podcast. We'll see you next week.